All right, good evening, everyone, and welcome to this evening's Love is in the Air program. My name is Chris Gray, and I work at the Lafayette Library and Learning Center. Before we begin, a quick word about our library system. The Contra Costa County Library connects you with resources, services, and materials at 26 different branches. Visit any library to access books, periodicals, DVDs, audiobooks, special collections, and use our public computers, printers, and free Wi-Fi. Through our website, you can find reading recommendations, digital periodicals, streaming video, and learning resources for all ages. At the end of tonight's talk, we'll pose some of the questions to our speaker, Bob Lewis. If you have a question, just type it into the Q&A tab, which you should see at the bottom of your Zoom screen. We'll get to as many questions as we have time for. I do want to note that I have disabled the chat, and so we won't have a running chat, and I won't call on people if they raise their hands. Please just type in any questions you have into our Q&A. Bob Lewis has taught birding classes in the Bay Area for over 25 years and served as the chair of the Golden Gate Bird Alliance Adult Education Committee. He's photographed birds in more than 40 countries, and his life list is over 5,000 species. Bob, we're very excited to have you with us here today.
Okay, thank you very much, Chris. I'm very pleased to be able to turn the library website into a dating site tonight, but it's a dating site for birds. So the subject is Love is in the Air. Tomorrow is Valentine's Day, and here we go. Oh, I should say the picture on the screen right now is a family of grebes, Clark's grebes, and we'll talk more about them in just a minute. So here's our agenda. I'm going to start out with grebes, and I picked grebes as the introducing subject because they have a more romantic courtship than almost any other bird there is. And we'll spend a little bit of time trying to understand just what's going on there. And then we'll talk about how birds pick their partners. And there are all kinds of different associations with different species of birds. And the most common one is just a male and a female, but we'll get into some more complicated things like polyandry and some other relationships. And with all this romance going on, the result of that is usually baby birds. And we'll spend a little bit of time talking about raising up a family. So here we go with the grebes. So grebes are water birds. They somewhat resemble ducks, I guess, in that they're on water, but they're not in the same family. They're in a different group, and there are 22 different species of grebes. Some of them are only in Europe, some of them are only here, and the closest relatives of grebes, believe it or not, are flamingos, and they don't look at all alike. So grebes are monogamous. Monogamous means they have a um, a pair, a relationship that lasts at least a year, or at least a period of courting, nest building, egg laying, and raising young. Um, Most birds are monogamous, depending on the definition of what monogamy is. Um, so let's, I thought I was, well, okay. So here's a picture of two different kinds of grebes. The Ecmophorus grebes in the US consist of Clark's grebe and Western grebe. And the Western grebe is on the top on the right-hand side, and Clark's grebe is on the bottom. And if you look carefully, you can see that their faces are a little different, in that Western grebe has black around the eye, and Clark's grebe has white around the eye. And sometimes the grebes get mixed up about who they're courting. And on the left, you can see part of the courtship dance that grebes do, which is called the rush. And these two grebes are rushing together across the water, but one is one species and one is the other species. Um, so there's sometimes a little bit of confusion, even among grebes, about who's who. Um, in the courtship for these two species of grebes, the first thing that happens is something called advertising. And it's just kind of a, a bark or a squawk that the birds give. And the and one of these species gives a single note call, and the other species gives a two-note call. And after that, the courtship procedures are the same. So if you missed the introduction, you may not realize what species you're talking to. So this is a group of, well, I'm looking carefully at it, and it seems to be Clark's grebes. Clark's grebes also have bright yellow bills in breeding season, which helps identify them. They were thought to be, these two species were thought by humans to be a single species until sometime in the 1950s. And then researchers realized that the species with the white faces mostly all mated with white faces, and the species with black around the eye mated with the same. And so began to realize that they were two different species. So here's some of the courtship dance. As I said, it starts with that introduction thing and then a pointing uh, procedure. And then if two grebes in the pointing group kind of think that maybe they like to get to know one another a little better, they take off across the water, and it's called rushing. And you can see Western grebes here in the two pictures on the left rushing across the water. And it's done together. And when they get to the end of the rush, they slow down and drop underwater. Now, if the rush has been satisfying to both participants, um, they will come up and sometimes bring seaweed up as they rise up. And then they drape the seaweed over one another's heads, like you can see on the right-hand side, the weed dance. If the rush wasn't satisfying, then as they go underwater, they just go off in different directions and they don't even have to say goodbye. So it's a complex little ceremony to decide if this grebe is a grebe that I'd like to spend at least the year with. And if the answer is yes, then we'll proceed to maybe build a nesting site and so forth. So that's the Echimophorus grebes, the Western and Clark's grebe. Um, oh yeah, here's a little bit more weed draping, and and these are Clark's grebes with the bright yellow bill. So the next thing that happens is a little bit of a nest platform gets built, and the seaweed that you see here that the female grebe is sitting on the left is actually the nest. And the nest is anchored to some vegetation that's rooted in the lake. And so the rooted vegetation holds it from drifting around. And then it's just made up of a bunch of other seaweed and weeds and so forth that's pulled together into a floating platform. And on the left, the grebes are mating. And then I was taking these pictures from a boat in Lake County on the lake there. And the woman driving the boat is quite a student of grebes. And she said, as we were watching the mating going on the left, she said, "Now watch. He's going to step on her head." And indeed, he did. He then walks up and steps on her head and walks off. So that's the mating program. And the next thing that happens is the nest gets kind of finalized, and then an egg gets laid, and you can see the egg behind the grebe here. So this is a Western grebe with a black face and the kind of greenish bill, and uh, and the eggs are laid right on this floating nest, and so for me, it's hard to imagine that these eggs get incubated by the grebe. So she'll sit on the egg, a couple of eggs usually, and eventually the eggs will hatch. And yet they're in water. I guess the water is warm enough because it's sunny and it's right on the very surface of the water, so maybe it gets warmed up a little bit. But anyway, eventually chicks will hatch as a result of all of this romantic behavior that's going on. And here are a couple of Western grebes with their chicks. And you can see that what the chicks do right away is climb up on mom or dad and ride around, well, like grebe chicks do. So they're no longer sitting in the wet um, nest site, but they're up in a nice warm place. And if this is the male that's carrying the grebes, then the female will come up and feed the grebes on the male's back, or vice versa. So the pair um, con continue to care for the young through the whole period of raising them up until they're able to be independent. So this is called a pair bond. The idea that the two adults stay together for an extended period, long enough to raise the young. Not all birds do that. Some birds, some species of birds, have a very short interaction, and then either the female or the male will raise the young alone, and we'll look into that in a minute. But I want to finish the grebe story first. So here are a few Clark's grebes, and if we go back and just look at the chicks a minute, well, look at the chicks here, and you'll see that they're quite white, and the chicks in the Western grebe have more gray on them. So that's, you can differentiate a little bit between even the chicks. But they're both pretty white. And let's see. The young in the lower picture, you can see the adult grebe is feeding a little bit of feather to the young grebe, and the feather helps prevent digestive problems in the young birds. Helps them regurgitate a pellet that may have some fish bones or something in it, and it's a very common thing for the grebes to be fed feathers. You can see the note over here on the left. They nest in shallow fresh water. And as I said, these are in Clear Lake and Lake County. Some years the grebes, many grebes nest in Clear Lake, and some years there's not very many at all. and it depends on how the climate is going, the ambient temperature, the water level, and all kinds of other things. The grebes know when it's time to nest, but it's hard for birders to know exactly when it's going to happen. It usually happens somewhere between April and June. And you can go to Clear Lake and see this going on. There are a number of smaller grebes too, and smaller grebes also have courtship ceremonies and raise young. In the case of the pied-billed grebe, which is in the picture here, instead of laying two eggs, they may lay three, four, five, even six eggs. And here's a picture in Sierra Valley of a an adult grebe with six chicks, and that's quite a bunch. And you can see there are actually three of them somehow tucked in under the wings, and three more of them following behind. The young grebes are patterned like this because the breaking up of the color into a pattern helps camouflage them a little bit. And when they hide in the reeds, they look like shadows instead of birds, and it's a little bit safer for them. There are not a lot of predators well, I shouldn't say there are not a lot. Peregrine falcon finds them tasty, and so the adult grebe is quick to alert the chicks to flee, and she'll give a call, or he will give a call, and the grebes will immediately take off into the reed bed and disappear. But they were feeling pretty safe here. Here's another pied-billed grebe looking at a chick, and this one was feeding the chick crayfish, and it would dive down and grab a hold of a crayfish, bring it up, shake off the claws that a crayfish has, and break off the tail. And then it would feed a piece of crayfish tail to this chick. And the chick would take it in its beak and then drop it into the water. And then the adult would dive down, fish it back up, and put it back in the young bird's bill again. And eventually, after about three or four tries, the chick figured out that this was to eat and he'd swallow it. The chick you can see is a fluffy bird, and its plumage contains a lot of air, and so it's not able to dive underwater, and it has to be fed by the adult for a while until it begins to develop its juvenile plumage. There are a couple more grebes that we see in our area, the horned grebe on top and the eared grebe on the bottom. These are very similar birds. The horned grebe doesn't nest around here, but the eared grebe does. It nests in Hayward Shoreline, or has nested there. And I've seen the young at that time. The bird suddenly looks a lot different than it did in this picture. This is the winter plumage of eared grebe on the bottom, the non-breeding plumage, and this is the breeding plumage, or the alternate plumage. And so it's quite a striking bird, actually, and you can see why it's called eared grebe. And it's similar relative. The horned grebe has the yellow in a slightly different area. And you can see the little chick riding on the grebe on the bottom. So again, it's camouflaged and able to flee into the reeds. So that's the grebe story. Now, we said that grebes are monogamous then, at least for a mating period. And so I want to talk a little bit about mate choice and how birds choose their mate. It it's well, the courtship ceremony that we just talked about with grebes is not something that grebes learn. It's something that they're born with. It's controlled by DNA and hormones and so forth. And so they go through this courtship without having to learn it. They know it from birth. That's for grebes. In many birds, the female chooses the mate, and she chooses a mate on the basis for grebes of the quality of the dance and so forth. Um, in some birds, it's the quality of the song, or it's the quality of the habitat that the male is defending. So there are different aspects of choice, but it's generally the female that makes the choice. And part of at least what ornithologists argue is part of the reason for her choice is that she's looking for a male who will um, father offspring that will be successful in also passing on genes. And so she's looking for a male that has what's called good fitness. Fitness means that he'll have a lot of offspring. The offspring will have more offspring and so forth. And if you go down to the great grandchildren, there'll be lots and lots of great grandchildren. And therefore, the female's genes have also been passed down uh, to many birds. And so the argument is that there is a drive in both a male and a female bird to be successful in passing on their genes. Um, so the picture on the right is a lesser bird of paradise. And birds of paradise are a group of birds that are called lekking birds, where males all gather together. And then females come to look at the group of males and make a choice based on how they're dancing. Um, Parrots are very long-lived birds, and since we're talking about love is in the air, I felt I had to put a lovebird in the picture. And lovebirds like to sit up next to one another, and people see them as romantic little birds. Parrots are long-lived, and they often form multi-year relationships. So these red-masked parakeets on the right-hand side are billing together. It's a way of forming and strengthening a pair bond, and so they will probably continue to strengthen their bond and end up nesting and raising young. But if they're unsuccessful, if a pair is unsuccessful at raising young, then they may split up and find other mates to try to pass their genes on with another parrot. So a little bit more about monogamy. A, a good number of birds have uh, um, almost lifelong relationships. So I noted albatross and eagles, geese, pigeons, and there are other birds that will pair up after about the second or third year of life and will continue to live together, migrate together, and raise offspring together for a lifetime, for 15 or 20 years. Um, And for snow geese like these in the picture, the first year offspring are accompanied in the migration by the adults. So for ducks and geese, they have to learn their migratory route, and the adults are the way that they learn it. Perching birds instinctively know their migratory route and don't have to learn that. So parents of sparrows and warblers and thrushes don't migrate with the young, but a lot of the larger birds do so. Most in most birds, the males do some type of display to convince the female that they're a good choice. And here we see a lazuli bunting showing spreading its wing and showing the orange on the breast. Um, in most perching birds, passerines and so forth, the pair bond is a very short time. It's just long enough to raise the young, and then they'll go their separate ways and migrate separately from one another. But sometimes when they return to the breeding area again the following year, they find the same mate. And ornithologists have found that out by banding birds and so forth, and seeing who pairs up with who coming back. And in some of these species, it's as many as 20 or 30% that repeat a second year. Sometimes the males and females, especially of passerine birds, look different. It helps them figure out whether they're looking at a boy or a girl. And the males often have the most colorful plumage. And the male here is on the right, and you can see he has a bright yellow patch on the underwings, and he flares his wings up, and the female thinks that's cool. The female's on the left here. Um, Again, it's the male trying to get attention with color or song or dance or whatever. Here's another example of a monogamous. I'm having trouble with monogamous tonight. So anyway, Lease Tern picks a single partner for the nesting period. And instead of showing bright colors or a dance, what the Lease Tern does is it brings presents. And he brings a fish. And here's the male with a fish. And the female is dipping her head down in what's called a receptive pose, which means she's willing to consider mating with this guy who brought a fish. Um, so here you can see, although they partner up for a year and separate, 47% of them return for a second year in the Lease Tern. So they're not lifelong partners, but they might be multiple year partners in the case of Lease Tern. Here's a duck that also the male does something to get attention. And in this case, this is a common goldeneye displaying. He puts his head way back and points his bill up in the air. And usually there are a group of males doing this and a couple females who come in to see what's going on. So again, it's giving the female an opportunity to make a selection among a group of males. Cranes, you may have seen cranes in the Central Valley, and they're famous for their dance. So two cranes will face one another and think, well, now let's see, will this work out? And they go through some displays and wings out, and dancing and bowing, as you can see on the right, bouncing up in the air. And it's quite fun to watch cranes in their courtship dance. So the dance can work out or it might not work out, and they'll go off and dance with somebody else. Um, they once cranes form a bond, though, that bond lasts for multiple years. So it's monogamous for an extended period. Albatross, um, you might have heard of the albatross that's been nesting on Midway. I'm trying to think. I think it's a Laysan albatross. Um, and I can't remember her name, but essentially she's a Methuselah. She's been nesting on the island, on the same island, and for a long time with the same partner for roughly 60 years. And every year she returns and lays an egg and raises a chick. And so this is an extremely long duration pair bond. And you can see albatross in a nesting area, black-browed albatross nest in large colonies, and you can see them all sitting on their nest. And one of them will come in from fishing, and then they'll bill one another. They'll touch bills and reestablish that they know one another and have found the right person or right bird. So again, it's establishing and maintaining this pair bond. It's fun to watch penguins. Penguins also bond for extended periods, multiple years in some cases, and they do what's called allopreening. They preen one another, and here are two working away at just being happy being penguins. So we talked a little bit about passerines and perching birds, and passerines do form pair bonds, and these bonds are usually for just the breeding period, just to meet, greet, raise young, and then that's the end of the story. So for passerines, often the male is declaring a territory by song, and in doing this, he's apparently sending a couple of messages. One is to other males saying, "This is my territory, and I don't want you to come here." And oftentimes, other males will respond to that statement just the way the bird wants them to. They figure it's not worth an argument. He's got a territory there and he's making a big fuss about it. So we'll go and find a different territory, or I will go find the another territory, the male. The other thing he's doing is impressing the female that he has a territory, and and hopefully it's a territory that has some food in it. And so the female will look around and decide, okay, he looks good. He's got good plumage. It's not all ruffled up and everything, and he doesn't look like he's starving. And it seems like this habitat that he's in is good. And so maybe I'll pick him. Um, the song that the bird sings, that the male sings, is inherited in part, but it's the details of it are learned, and so for many passerines, the most famous of these that's been studied is the white-crowned sparrow. that was studied in San Francisco. So in different areas, the white-crowned sparrow has slightly different songs. So it inherited a template. Its DNA says this is what the song looks like, but it adds a few beats and twists to the song that go along with the song that's being sung by other birds in that general territory. And there was a researcher in San Francisco that could tell just by listening to a white-crowned sparrow where it grew up. It's kind of like uh, humans being able to tell whether somebody grew up in Boston or Atlanta or whatever. Um, that's a green-tailed towhee in the picture. Here's a pair of cardinals, and courtship in this case again includes that allopreening. Sometimes it's feeding. The male usually brings a gift of some kind of food to the female. Sometimes there's a problem. And in this case, the problem was a a duck appeared in Calusa Wildlife Refuge. That was the only duck of its species in the whole refuge, or probably in all of California, called a falcated duck. That's that bird in the background there. And there are no birds of its species. So um, it wants to raise young, but it can't find a mate. So it displays to other birds that look kind of like what its mate should look like. And here this duck is courting an American widgeon, and the American widgeons just swam on by and um, paid no attention to it. And the poor falcated duck didn't end up finding a mate. So the occasionally something better will happen when a single duck courts a different species, and then you'll get a hybrid. So two different species mate, and if they're close enough in their genetics, they may have fertile eggs and be able to raise young. So that's a lot about monogamy and different kind of approaches and different birds. But there are other kinds of relationships. One of them is called polyandry, and it's the case where instead of a female finding one guy, um, she finds a few guys. And this is especially common among some shorebirds and especially phalaropes. So in the case of phalaropes, um, th the normal sex role that the most of the birds that we've been talking about have, where the male finds a territory and um, and the female incubates primarily incubates the young. In this case, the female finds the territory. The female is the brightly colored of the pair. So in the picture here, you can see the female is on the right, and she's got a lot of red in her plumage, and looks brighter. And the male is a little bit duller. And there's a reason for that, because what's going to happen is the female will I believe the female still makes the selection of the mate, but the males will come around and she'll pick one, but it's her territory. And then she'll lay eggs, but after she lays the eggs, she leaves. The male is faced with a group of eggs. And if he wants his genes to be passed on, he better do something like incubate the eggs, which he does. The female goes off and finds another territory, another male, and lays another group of 4 eggs. And so uh, she can do 2 or 3 partners in a nesting season. So there's an advantage to the female that that she is able to well, normally a shorebird would lay 4 eggs, and and then if she's got to incubate them, um, and take care of the young, she can't go off and lay any more than that. And if she lays like 5 eggs or 6 eggs, usually that's too many chicks to take care of, and some will die. So 4 is the limit for the number of offspring that she can have in a season. But the phalarope lays 4 more, lays 4, so she could have 12 offspring doing it that way. And the male goes along with it because at least he gets 4 eggs and 4 chicks that carry his genes. So there are some other birds listed here that behave in this manner. I went to Australia a while ago to see plains wanderer, which is another bird like this. And here's a picture of a plains wanderer, a female plains wanderer, and she also um, is bright orange on the breast, so she's colorful. The male is not, and you can see the reason for that now because the male is the one that sits on the nest, so he's not colorful. She is. And button quails, also in Australia, behave in the same way. So these are polyandrous, one female, multiple males. Our spotted sandpiper behaves like this. And this is a female that we saw in Sierra Valley. Um, we actually had whistled the call of a spotted sandpiper, and a female flew in and landed on this branch, so a high point in the marsh, and started displaying to show that, hey, this was her territory, and whoever this was that was whistling had darn well better get out of here. And uh, so the female plays the main role in establishing a territory, and the male ends up doing the incubation and brooding. And so it's a bird that we see quite a lot here in the wintertime. But the spotted sandpiper in the wintertime isn't spotted, so here you get to see a spotted one. Okay, there's the opposite story called polygamy. And in this case, it's one male and multiple females. So what's the story here? Well, it's often that colonial nesting birds behave in this way. Birds in marshy areas where there's uh, um, a, a best territory is kind of in the middle of the nesting areas. And as you get on the outside edges, uh, the nests are more exposed to predation. So the best territory is kind of in the center, and the most powerful male will establish that territory as his. Well, what do you mean most powerful? Well, in the case of the red-winged blackbird, it's the brightest epaulets that help to establish that this male is not to be messed with. And if he wants that territory in the middle, let him have it. If he's got that territory with these bright epaulets, a female will come by and think, well, that's very nice territory. And if I raise young there, um, that area probably won't be threatened by predators. And And so she'll build a nest in the male's territory. And then another female will come in and think the same thing. And so there can be two, three, four females um, building nests in the territory of this male. Marsh wrens do this, red-winged blackbirds, yellow-headed blackbirds, and so forth. And it's a, a, a sustained association. The male continues to defend his territory and defend the nests that are in the territory, but it's a relationship with more than one female then. Yeah, marsh wrens, instead of epaulets, use song, and female selects based on song and the territory, and that's the same kind of story. Then there are birds that really don't form any long-term relationship. It's just uh, a display, a mating, and see you later. Um, and so it's called indiscriminate sexual relationships of very brief duration, and that's called promiscuity. And about 6% of birds in the world are of this type, behave in this way. So sage grouse is an example of this. Manakins in South America and Central America are like this, and most hummingbirds are like this. So these birds um, need to display in some way to convince females to come and be willing to mate, and a lot of them do what's called lekking, and so it's gathering birds, gathering males together, and then females come in to kind of see what's going on and make a choice. So um, there are quite a few promiscuous species in the world. The most famous is probably the fairy wrens of Australia. They Researchers have studied the DNA of chicks in fairy wrens' nests, and they find that almost all the eggs, with the exception of maybe one, um, are the result of mating with a different male than the one that's associating with the female. So the fairy wrens are they're called socially monogamous, because a pair will um, will establish a nesting site and will watch over the chicks. But the young that are in the nest are the offspring of many other males. So the female is off to other males' territories, and males are off to other females' nests all over the place in the fairy wren world. So that's probably the ultimate promiscuous species. It notes here that salt marsh sparrows are highly promiscuous with no pair bonds. And part of the apparent um, reasoning for this, part of what the ornithologists think this is the reason that this has evolved this way, is that salt marsh sparrows build their nests right on the edge of a marsh, and tidal changes can wipe out a nest. And so the sparrows need to very quickly mate and rebuild and lay eggs again if that happens. And so they'll grab a hold of whatever sparrow in the neighborhood to mate with. That's roughly the explanation anyway. Um, so we've talked a little bit about rituals, the dancing and the songs and so forth. There are some other kinds of pretty complicated rituals, and bowerbirds have one set, and that's to build a bower. And this is a bower here that you can see, and they decorate it and everything else, and then they dance in front of it, and a female will come around, and there'll be a number of males building bowers, not right next to one another, but in the neighborhood, kind of. So the female can go from bower to bower and see who's done a good job. She comes in from the back side while the male is in the front of this bower. And if she thinks he's interesting, he will, and he senses that, then he will come around the bower and back and approach her from behind. If she decides, wait a minute, I'm not interested, she just walks out the front of the bower and she's gone. If the bower is built so that the sides are not strong, the female won't approach it because the bower is protecting her from the male coming around and trying to get at her from the side, and she wants to be able to make the decision. So again, the female is checking it out. Here's a picture of a group of mannequins doing a lecking dance. And the female is on the left, the green bird, and the males fly up in front of her, give her a full Monty, bright blue, shining display. And then this male that's blurry in flight will go around to the end of the row, and the next bird will display and so forth. And so the males take turns displaying. The center bird here is a young bird, and it's still green. It's baby plumage, so it doesn't have a chance at mating with the female, but it's learning the dance. And next year, maybe it'll get a try. Other birds that display are turkeys, certainly do. The birds of paradise do, um, and the birds of paradise do quite a show. And hummingbirds, some of my favorites, can put on a real fancy thing. The marvelous spatule tail. You may have seen some videos of this bird that rotates those paddles up in flight, around his head, kind of, and gives quite a show, and hoping that the female will decide that he's the one. He also has that bright blue gorget that's part of the display with the petals and the blue, and wow. Um, so in hummingbirds, the only thing that males do as part of the whole raising kids is a display to try to get the female to select him, provide the sperm to fertilize the egg, and then he's off displaying to somebody else. So the females, for almost all the hummingbirds, are the ones that build the nest, lay the eggs, incubate, and raise the young. Here's a calliope hummingbird from Sierra Valley. It displays with that wonderful red and white gorget, and it practices its display by flaring its gorget to pine cones. So it picks a pine cone that's about the size of a female and works on getting it just right. And then to take a look at the end result of all this courtship and carrying on and partying and dancing and everything else, its offspring. And here are some pictures of hummingbird nests. Hummingbird nests are made from, almost all of them are made from cobwebs, spider web. And the spider web is elastic. And as the young grow, the nest expands. The oasis hummingbirds here, they're a Peruvian hummingbird, have finally outgrown the nest, even though it expanded as much as it could. But they're ready to fledge right there, those two. There's some birds that hardly make any nest at all. A lot of the shorebirds are like that. And here are avocets and plovers with their eggs, just a scrape in the sand. Some make big bag nests. You might have seen bush tits that build a bag inside a bush, and they'll lay as many as 8 or 10 eggs in this bag, and then all these chicks, when they hatch, you'll see them coming out, or when they fledge. Uh, so it's a very cozy home. Some, like the broadbill, build their baggy nest over water, so it's protected from mammal type predators. Um, it's quite a pretty bird and kind of a um, messy nest, I guess. Some species nest in holes, tree swallows, woodpeckers. Um, both male and female feed the young here in both cases. So there is a pair bond that goes on for the year. And some species live in apartment houses. So monk parakeet has this huge nest with multiple pairs in it. The sociable weaver, there are so many weavers' nests in this pile of straw and grasses that sometimes the branch that the nest is in breaks off and they have to start all over again. A bad apartment house. And Malleefowl, this is in Australia, build a nest, build a mound of vegetation, and it's like a compost heap. And as the vegetation composts, as it ferments, it generates heat, and the female lays her eggs in this mound, and then the male, I think that's right, male and female roles. The male maintains the temperature by, here he's digging off vegetation, or he'll add vegetation if it gets cold, and controls it so that it's the right temperature for hatching the eggs. And in this case, when the eggs hatch, the adult birds are gone, and the chicks dig their way out of the compost, and they're fully feathered, and they take off. Um, so they're the ultimate precocial um, birds. Yeah, precocial development means that the young hatch with feathers and they're able to feed themselves quickly. And in that case, you only need one parent really to feed them and take care of them, and you still have a pretty good chance that the chick will survive. And so things like the sage grouse that we saw, where the male doesn't participate in raising the young, the female can deal with it because the chicks are already finding their own food. This is called precocial development. And the coot is like this. The loon, I say they're like that. They're semi-precocial. They need to be fed for a little while, but they're already feathered and they can keep warm by themselves. Birds like osprey um, are part way there, but then there are birds that are altricial, which means they have no feathers when they're born, and so they're desperate to have a parent keeping them warm and feeding them, and so it takes both parents to protect and feed and raise these birds up and until they grow their own feathers and can fledge. So most of the, or if not all of the passerines are like this, and and have to be cared for by really two parents. Here's a dipper with the same story, a ball-shaped nest, mosses, weeds, a long time for the chicks to develop. And aren't they adorable? Uh, and then the parents have to teach them how to swim and dive and feed themselves. So that's kind of a summary of different different ways birds find one another and what happens when they do. And I hope that when a bird asks to be your Valentine, you'll say yes. Here's a couple teenage green herons just checking out being together. I'm glad you were able to come. Enjoyed talking to you. And I'm going to stop sharing. And if there are questions, I'll give it a try.
Thank you so much, Bob. As always, highly informative and amazingly illustrated. Your talks. Before I get to our viewers' questions, I have a question. And please let me know if you covered this sort of in your introduction. But I found myself being curious about with all these different modes of mating and courtship, like monogamy, polyandry, polygyny, promiscuity, etc. If there are environmental factors that drive that. Like, it made me think, oh, are more passerines, promiscuous generally, or does it tend to have something to do with the environment that the bird is in? Like, do we see most shorebirds in a certain area exhibiting like the same types of mating behavior?
Well, it's it's a result of evolution that the species has evolved to have this behavior. And the behavior doesn't change from year to year for a species, or if it's relocated someplace, it doesn't change. So it's a long-term thing.
Hmm.
But the evolution of that behavior is in part determined by habitat. So, as we noted, the marsh birds are often not monogamous because of the value of that nesting site in the center and the desire for the females to have that. So it's something that's evolved over millions of years,
Hmm.
really. Yeah.
No, that's very interesting. Thank you.
Interesting thought. Mhm.
Folks, if you've got questions, please put them in the Q&A. We may not get to them all, but we'll try to cover some of them here. Um, Sort of rewinding back to the beginning of the talk, when we spent some time with the grebes, we had a few questions about them. Um, uh, I'll throw out just a few questions altogether. Some folks are asking about, can we see the grebe rushing behavior at Lake Almanor or Chester? What time of year? What other places in Northern California to see them? I know you highlighted the Sierra Valley.
Yeah, it's actually Clear Lake in Lake County is the place to go. There's a woman there that runs a flatboat, and she'll take you out on the lake and for a fee, of course, and you get to see all this behavior. I believe I have seen it at Lake Almanor. Um, I've seen rushing, not often, but on Lake Merritt and in the bay, just along the shoreline. But it's a kind of not a lot of that kind of activity going on because, especially in the bay, it's not very suitable for nesting. So it's kind of hey, let's try this out and see what's happening, but it's not going to go anywhere, is it?
It- as a lot of couples in the Bay Area find out. Not always the best, most suitable place to raise a family.
Oh dear.
Um, well, it's expensive. Curious about time of year for grebes specifically. Like, when are they rushing and courting? When does egg laying happen? When are the chicks hatching?
Yeah. So um, probably April is the earliest when you'll see some courtship behavior going on. And by June, it's usually the chicks are beginning to fledge and it's over. But having said that, a whole lot depends on the water level in the lake. And so and again, I'm speaking about Clear Lake in this case, but I think it's mirrored in other places. So you have to be able to build a nest that you can anchor to vegetation that's coming up from the bottom of the lake. If you're going to nest there. And so if the water level drops too much, then you're nesting out too far from the reed bed and things just don't seem right. And birds will put off nesting until maybe later in the year. And if somehow it happens that the water level rises, then maybe that works out. Or vice versa, that we have a big rainy winter, then I think nesting will probably happen later. So it's probably the drought years, the nesting is early, the flood year, it's later. What I do is call Clear Lake and ask. It's a company called Eyes of the Wild. Eyes of the Wild, and I think you can find it on the internet. And I asked the lady who runs the show there, when are the grebes nesting this year? And then I go up with a camera and pay her a lot of money, and she'll take me out. I can take pictures. Yeah, so
That's it.
it's
That's a reason to get up there. I need to get
yeah,
up there again. It's
it's
interesting, there being the interplay of both the practical environmental factors, of raising the young and nesting and everything, but then also sometimes the courtship behavior, which I understand is like driven often by hormones, and those are going to get triggered by time of year and things like that.
Sure is.
I mean, it's like I already hear, the robins roost together in the winter, but I already hear a couple of them that are starting to strike out and sing their courtship song, And I understand at that point they split off and they no longer hang out with each other.
Mhm. Yeah.
Um,
Okay.
let's see, what do we got here? Um, Someone's curious about when's a good time to see the sandhill crane dance in the Lodi area.
Um, Probably, let's see, what month is this? This is February. Um, Late February to the beginning of March.
Okay.
So now,
Get thee to Lodi, yeah.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Let's see. In the case of the Wilson's phalarope and other species where the male is left to incubate eggs on his own, generally, how does he feed himself? Does the female return with food for him, or does he take little breaks and go out to feed himself?
Yeah. Um, she generally after the first partnership, the female has laid 4 eggs, and the male is left with the eggs. The female goes off then and finds another partner. So she's not going to come back and feed this guy. He's on his own. And yeah, he takes breaks. And uh, the the fact that they're nesting in a wet area generally means that there's plenty of food around. that's easily obtained for the shorebirds. So he can take off, get a snack, and come back. Yeah.
Good. And I think you touched on this. Somebody asked about uh when like the males or the birds are that are doing the incubating that are less colorful. The question was, is that so that they'll be camouflaged while sitting on the eggs? Which I think you touched on and said that yes, that is the case.
Yeah.
Um,
There's a very weird situation with birds like vireos and um, maybe it's grosbeak, I've forgotten which, that the females sing from the nest.
hmm,
And I've never been able to figure out what's going on there because there they are in a situation where they really should be hiding, and yet they're singing. So it doesn't always fit right together and make total sense to a human.
hmm.
That's,
Yeah, and you definitely showed yeah a few examples of things that don't quite make sense,
yeah.
tonight. Let's see here. Someone asks if you would mind talking a little bit about same-sex pair bonding. Um, they mentioned they'd heard about the two male penguins at the possibly the Bronx Zoo that raised an orphan chick together.
Yeah, to my knowledge, it's relatively rare. Um, and I imagine that in a zoo environment, the opportunities for conventional partnership can be limited. And yet there's the drive to go through what normally would be passing on your genes and raising young. So it can happen. There are well, let's take acorn woodpeckers. There, there's situations there where the young, so a pair of acorn woodpeckers uh, has young in year one. In year two, there are limited places to nest, and the young from year one help their parents raise the next batch of young. So they're birds that are not directly passing on their genes that are helping raise these, but they are in a way passing on half of their genes, kind of, because they have some of the same genes as they have as their parents, and so it's and so it can be male birds or female birds or whatever that are
Hmm.
helping raise the young. I don't know a lot of cases of uh, same-sex birds. I'm as I think. I mean, it would be most likely to be two females because you have to have the eggs somehow to do it. And in the zoo, I guess it came about by an abandonment and another bird coming in to help.
And I'll mention that one angle of the question was about same-sex pair bonding, not specifically the raising, but just sort of like yeah, the yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, pair. So pair bonding, you can stretch that a little bit. I guess it some ducks, for example, mallards, are in it for sex, and that's what they're after. And so they will try to mate with anything. That's not really very pair bonding. It's I mean, there's no real relationship in it. Um, So I don't know. I haven't, I think I'm not answering this very well because my knowledge is pretty limited in it. I think now I've been provoked to try to look into it.
It might be an opportunity to read more. I mean, I do some of the selection of books for our library system in the
Yeah.
500s, which includes all kinds of books on animals, and it is striking how much literature there is each month being published on birds, and yeah, both birds and yeah, and other kinds of animals. I've seen
Mm.
some interesting books coming out recently about same-sex pair bonding or um, yeah, like all kinds of
Well,
activities.
along that line, I do know of a case in hummingbirds where there are so in this particular hummingbird species, the female and male look different. They have different plumages. But some of the females have male plumages, so they're cross dressers.
Hmm.
And the advantage that they have is that the males are more boisterous than females and push the females away from flowers to feed. But if you look like a male, the males won't push you away.
Hmm.
And the males won't try to aggressively mate with you or whatever else, they leave you alone. And so the survival of the individual is better in a way. But at some point, if you're a female, you want to pass on your genes, even though you look funny or look different. Um, and I believe that eventually they do mate as two birds who look like males, but one is a female and one is a male. So it's not exactly what you're saying, but it's different.
And the key thing is that it works for them, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I think that's a good place for us to stop. I think that's a nice message. I want to apologize to folks. We're not able to get all the questions tonight. But yeah, there are other questions. But we are recording tonight's talk, and I'm going to send it out to everybody that has registered. And Bob, you've got a website. It's still up, correct? If people are interested in taking a look at your work, or
I do have a Flickr site that shows my photographs. Yeah, it's just let's see, Flickr slash photos slash Bob Lewis.
if you want me to, I can share that with registrants after the talk, which I'll probably I can send out an email a week from now when we have the recording up and everything.
Okay, that's fine.
Um,
I'll send you a note making sure I've got it right.
sure, of course. Bob, again, I want to thank you for taking time out this very rainy evening. I'm glad things worked out and we all kept our power up and were able to yeah, to
Yeah,
learn and see everything that you were willing to share with us. Folks at home, thank you everybody for taking time to join us. And I hope everybody has a wonderful Valentine's Day and the rest of their week.
well done. Thanks for the opportunity. Good night.
Good night.